everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Mega Projects. This one is all about the South-North water transfer project because apparently China just can't do them big enough. It's like, the North's just a little bit dry. I've got a solution. Let's not move the people, let's move an entire water system up north. That's what you're going to learn about in today's video. I didn't really know anything about this, well, you know, I'm learning too. Off we go. If you think the Three Gorges Dam is China's biggest mega project, think again. Another project is quickly eclipsing it in terms of cost, longevity, and even controversy. This is an undertaking that will fundamentally alter China, and once again, it all comes down to water. And at this point, I should point out there are going to be some Chinese pronunciations. I'm looking them up. I've got my little iPad there. Gonna use its pronunciation dictionary. Hopefully we'll be okay. If not okay, smash that dislike button. What are you going to do? China's North-South water transfer project is colossal, but its aim is fairly straightforward: to divert 44.8 billion cubic meters of water per year from the Yangtze River in southern China to the Yellow River Basin in northern China. For a comparison, this is around half of the water consumed in California every single year. Parts of this gigantic project, incorporating vast lengths of canals, aqueducts, and dams, are already in operation, but it may not be fully completed for another 50 years. It is the largest and most ambitious redistribution of water the world has ever seen. But with the climate crisis we're facing, it's the sort of project that might need to be done a lot more in the future. China's water problem stems from the fact that resources and needs are not shared equally throughout the country. 80% of the country's fresh water is in the south of the country, with 12 northern provinces suffering water scarcity. 2 of these are actually classified as desert regions. To put it plainly, there's plenty of water in the south, but it's desperately needed in the north. Now, there are a few reasons for this problem, but population growth tends to be the best place to start. The North China Plain region, which incorporates Beijing and the area around it, accounts for 42% of the country's population, 40% of its arable land, but only 8% of its water. China has seen enormous internal migration over the years, particularly during the 20th century. This was somewhat orchestrated by the government to encourage population growth in the frontier regions, but the country's rapid industrialization basically led to millions of people going to the bigger cities, hoping to get better paid jobs. And often this has been in a west to east direction. As you might well know, the major cities of China are all down that east coast. Many of these cities have absolutely swelled dramatically, especially in the north. The result has meant a huge population disparity across an enormous country, a fact made even more problematic by the vast resources needed by such a large population. The mammoth industrial and agricultural sectors which have sprung up in the same place have only accelerated the problem, with 38% of China's agriculture, 46% of its industry, 50% of its power generation all residing in this relatively small northern region. Scientists believe that the groundwater beneath the North China Plain, an area with over 400 million inhabitants, will run out within the next 2 decades. In recent years, some wells dug around Beijing needed to be dug more than half a mile deep before hitting water. And if you're into really deep holes, definitely check out our video on the Kola Super Deep Borehole. Somehow, a video about a deep hole, I think it's actually the most popular video on this channel right now, which is, I didn't think that when I made it. The effects of severe water shortages coupled with booming industry and population growth has created a precarious situation. China has had a complex relationship with water since time began. The early 20th century alone saw countless devastating floods hit the country, with the horrific 1931 flood on the Yangtze River seen as the worst flood in recorded history. Estimates of those who died either directly or indirectly from the events that began on August 18th, 1931 range from 500,000 to 4 million people. And while having too much water was sometimes the case, it's now the opposite. But the two are still inextricably linked. The mass construction projects that began in the 1960s to reduce the flood threat have worked to a degree, but the dams and canals have also altered China's hydrology. The results of all this have been staggering. According to China's first national census of water, more than half of China's 50,000 rivers have vanished over the past 2 decades, while 70% of its remaining freshwater is polluted. That's insane. But once again, this is not a problem shared equally. The landlocked Henan region around the city of Zhengzhou has become the epicenter for the water crisis, with water table levels, the levels of underground water there, dropping by around 1 meter each and every year, and 70% of its water is not fit for human contact. And I read this originally before I made this video, and I was like, hey, Ollie, who writes the scripts, I was like, Ollie, do you mean consumption? And he was like, no. The report says contact, as in it can't touch people. Oh my god. It's like toxic. But 500 miles, 800 kilometers away in the Chinese capital of Beijing, the situation is completely different, with water sometimes diverted to the city at the expense of the regions directly below it. The mass industrialization that occurred rapidly in China has seen crop production as well as manufacturing soar. But all of these factories needed water, and it was the precious groundwater that was eagerly dispersed to whoever needed it, while farmers were encouraged to increase pumping from wells to satisfy their own demand. As if that all wasn't bad enough, there was the small matter of climate change, which scientists generally agree has significantly exacerbated the problem. For this modern problem, the Chinese turned to an old plan first conceived by Chairman Mao in 1952. His words, said somewhat flippantly at the time, proved to actually be rather accurate. The south has plenty of water, but the north is dry. If we could borrow some, that would be good. The wise words of Chairman Mao. Although he was right. That act of borrowing the water would grow to be the largest engineering project China had ever seen. I mean, your Chairman Mao is like, you say something flippant and it gets done. What was proposed was truly astonishing in scale and came with an estimated budget of $62 billion. And for reference, well, 1, that's an absolute shit ton of money, and 2, it's almost twice as much as the budget for the Three Gorges Dam, which, as I mentioned, we've done a video about. That in itself was an absurdly vast project. Anyway, this project is divided into 3 different routes: eastern, central, and western. The eastern and central routes have opened, while the western route remains in the planning stage. The Eastern project centers around a vast upgrade to the Grand Canal, the world's longest canal or artificial river. The oldest parts of the canal date from the 5th century BC, but it is getting a 21st century makeover. Water is drawn from the Yangtze River in the Jiangsu province, 150 miles northeast of Shanghai, thanks to an enormous pumping station capable of transferring 400 cubic meters of water a second. In yearly terms, that's 12.6 billion cubic meters. This water is then carried along the canal with the aid of more pumping stations before flowing through 2 9.3 meter in diameter horizontal tunnels 70 meters under the Yellow River and down an aqueduct to its destination of Tianjin, a province just south of Beijing. Work began on this route on the 27th of December 2002 and was initially slated for completion in 2012, though due to construction delays along with serious water pollution issues, this was pushed back. Trial operations began in 2013, with water arriving in the Shandong province around 3/4 of the way along the route in 2014, while water began reaching Tianjin, its final destination, the following year. The route is 716 miles long and equipped with 23 pumping stations with a combined power capacity of 45.4 megawatts. And just for some reference on how much power that is, that's enough to power 454,000 American homes. These pumping stations are needed along the route until the water reaches the aqueduct because of the topography of the landscape, with the Yangtze River, the source of the water, being at a lower altitude. Once the water passes the aqueduct, it begins to move downhill, so obviously no further pumping is needed. The central route now serves Beijing itself and runs from the Danjiangkou Reservoir on the Han River, a tributary of the Yangtze River, to the Chinese capital. The first step of the route was to enlarge the Danjiangkou Dam by increasing the crest elevation, which is the top of the dam, often where you'll see a road running across, from 162 meters to 176.6 meters above sea level, increasing the water level in the reservoir from 157 meters to 170 meters above sea level. This excess water would then flow into a newly built water diversion canal and then continue downhill with the aid of gravity, of course. It all sounds quite simple until you look at the actual canal itself. At approximately 765 miles, 1,264 kilometers long, it is roughly the distance from London to Marseille in the south of France. The amount of water carried along it is equally mind-blowing. Some 9.5 billion cubic meters of water travels along the central route each year, and by 2030, that number is expected to reach 14 billion cubic meters annually. To put some perspective on that would be about 46.6 days worth of water flow on the Nile. And you might be thinking, well, that's not very much then. But remember, the Nile River is, natural. The route traverses the North China Plain and uses gravity the entire way rather than any pumping stations. Water takes around 15 days to travel from its source to Beijing, with around 70% of the water in the capital now coming from the Central Route project. Like the Eastern Route, the central section also passes through 2 tunnels built under the Yellow River, with this section traversing the river near Zhengzhou. They each stretch 4.3 miles, 7 kilometers, with an 8.5 meter internal diameter, and are each designed to carry 500 cubic meters a second. Construction began in 2004 and was due to be completed in 2010, but was delayed until 2014, again because of environmental problems. The impact of the route on the Han River below the Danjiangkou Dam was of particular concern, as it saw 1/3 of its water diverted. There is another long-term project to alleviate this problem, which calls for another canal to be built from the Three Gorges Dam to the Han River to replenish it. I'll just add here, it sounds like everything they do just leads to more problems. We build this dam, so we have this, and then it leads to this problem, so we get the water from the dam. It's very complicated, China, but I'm sure it's necessary, but wow. While environmental issues seem to receive the most attention, the human impact was painful. Roughly 330,000 people living near the Danjiangkou Reservoir and along the canal route were resettled, and that number is expected to rise further in the coming years, with improvements and expansions planned along the route. On December 12, 2014, the Central Route, the most massive resupply of water the world had ever seen, finally opened. Known as the Big Western Line, the Western Route remains still in the planning stage and may well be in the planning stage for quite some time. The plan is to divert water from the Yangtze River and its tributaries, specifically the Tongtiang, Yalong, and Dadu rivers, into the Yellow River. To achieve this, numerous dams and tunnels will need to be constructed to cross the Tibetan Plateau and Western Yunnan Plateaus, situated between 3,000 and 5,000 meters above sea level. It aims to bring 3.8 billion cubic meters of water from the 3 tributaries 279 miles across the Bayankala Mountains to northwest China. The Tongtiang diversion is planned to stretch 179 miles in length, the Yalong 81 miles, and the Dadu 18.6 miles. The only problem with this is that it's estimated that the northern region that would benefit from this route is likely to need an extra 4.5 billion cubic meters of water by 2030 to maintain economic growth. The maths just doesn't quite work there. The magnitude of this project has meant intense ecological studies along its path. There are concerns about potential flooding, not to mention that the route would also pass through an earthquake zone. Considering the project is yet to start, but with some adamantly predicting an end date of 2050, it's not entirely clear whether this is gonna go ahead or not. Just like China's other monumental effort at reshaping their water supply, the Three Gorges Dam, mentioned many times in this video, if you'd like to learn more, watch my video on that. The North-South Water Transfer project has been plagued with environmental concerns, some so bad that it has held up progress for many years. While the Chinese government may claim that the impact on the environment has been minimal, this might not be the case. The Chinese government claims many things that are not always true. The Eastern Route in particular has been concerning, as many smaller rivers and canals feed into the main route along the way, many of which have been used by factories and power stations for runoff for decades. This was already a heavily polluted area, and there are concerns that the enormous project will simply worsen it. The Chinese government has said that 3,500 polluting companies have been forced to close in the area around the project, but it's not entirely clear how much of an impact this has had. Around 30 billion tons of wastewater flows into the Yangtze River each year, roughly 40% of China's total wastewater, making it one of the most polluted rivers in the world. In 2016, the Yangtze River Water Resources Commission stated that of the 329 drinking water resources monitored, only 193 of them were deemed at an acceptable level of water quality standards all year round. In total, it's believed that some 360 million rural inhabitants lack clean drinking water in China. That's an excellent illustration of just how life is different on the East Coast cities compared to rural China, which is well outside of the scope of this video, but super fascinating. The Yangtze, of course, will play a fundamental role in the South-North water transfer project, and this has led to fears of contaminated water flowing directly into large cities. But China is attempting to mitigate this problem, and in 2017 launched a $100 billion plan covering some 8,000 water cleanup projects to ensure that what comes out of the taps at least meets the minimum requirement for drinking water. Yet the scale of the problem is so large, even this may not be enough. So has China found a solution to its water problems? Well, that depends on who you talk to. Chinese officials remain bullish that the South-North water transfer project will be a great success, while experts from outside the country remain highly skeptical, to say the least. While it may bring short-term relief, many agree that in the long term it will prove to be entirely unsustainable. Without concerted efforts with regard to water conservation and reform of manufacturing practices, China's H2O problem will likely continue well into the future. This is a country with 20% of the world's population, but only 7% of its water. The South-North water transfer project has certainly been an extraordinary undertaking, but it is perhaps slightly tempered by the frankly absurd levels of industrialization in areas that could never support it. The project will likely improve the situation in the coming years, perhaps even coming decades, but the blatant disregard for one of our most precious resources has created a situation that simply may become untenable. It may even come down to a simple question: unchecked economic growth or clean water? So I really hope you enjoyed this mega projects video. This is what I found fascinating. This is a project I really didn't know anything about, and just the scope of it is so insane, and that's why I like making these mega projects videos, because we just learn about crazy things that humanity can do. If you liked it, smash that like button. If you didn't like it, smash that dislike button. If you want more videos, subscribe, leave a comment, vote up the one. Oh yeah, if you've got a suggestion for a video, leave it in the comments, vote up the ones you like using the thumbs up or whatever, and we'll probably make those. So go ahead, do that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.